Alicia. This is Sex After Trauma and what to do about it. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am the founder of Side by Side Counseling and a registered therapeutic counselor based in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Vancouver, BC. I specialize in working with trauma, sex workers, and LGBTQ2S+ individuals. I work from an anti-oppressive, trauma, and resilience-informed standpoint, and I'm deeply passionate about this work because I've seen the effects in my own life. I'm no stranger to trauma, and I love to lead my clients through their path of healing because I've walked it myself. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I am presenting this workshop from the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I would also like to name that land acknowledgements are not enough, but they remind us that we need to do more, such as donating time and money to Indigenous organizations, amplifying the voices of Indigenous people, leading grassroots change movements, and returning land to the Indigenous peoples it has been stolen from. Today, we'll go through an overview of trauma from a neurobiological perspective, relate that to sex, and discuss a 3-stage progression for healing from trauma that's affecting one's sex life. Throughout, I will pause for questions, and I'll offer a few exercises as well. I want to emphasize that these exercises are optional, and you are absolutely at choice throughout. So what is trauma? The Oxford Dictionary defines trauma as a physical injury or wound, or a powerful psychological shock that has damaging effects. The American Psychological Association says trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. And the commonality I'd like to highlight in these two definitions, which you will find across all definitions of trauma, is that trauma is the effect we experience after an event, not the event itself. I think this is important to emphasize because I hear a lot of clients tell me that what they went through wasn't traumatic enough to justify the effect they're experiencing. But how we experience the various things that happen to us and the effects they have on us vary greatly from person to person. And this is all to say that your experience is valid. You don't have to justify your trauma. What happened to you was real, and the effects you're now experiencing are normal and valid, and you absolutely deserve support, care, and help. So I'd like to now go into the neurobiology of trauma and describe what happens in our brains and bodies when we experience a traumatic event. Our brains are hardwired for survival. When our safety is threatened, the first thing that happens is our sympathetic nervous system turns on. This is also called our fight, flight, or freeze response. So our breathing gets shallow and fast, our heart rate speeds up, and our blood is diverted from our organs to our muscles so that we have all available power to run away from the threat or fight it. In our brains, the limbic system goes into overdrive. The limbic system is made up of 3 parts of the brain. The amygdala, which is our emotional center and is responsible for detecting threat and activating the appropriate fear behaviors in response to threatening or dangerous situations. The hypothalamus, which is responsible for stress and hormones. And the hypothalamus is the part of your brain that turns on your sympathetic nervous system when a danger is perceived. And the hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and memory, actually shrinks when we're experiencing traumatic events. So this whole limbic system in the brain is in high gear. And at the same time, the neocortex and prefrontal cortex nearly shut down. These centers in the brain are responsible for perception, decision-making, language, attention, impulse inhibition, perspective memory, and cognitive flexibility. So simply put, we go into survival mode. We're utilizing that fastest, most impulsive part of our brain, and the parts that make thoughtful, rational decisions nearly turn off. And everything not required for survival turns off as well. So things like hunger, sleepiness, digestion, and desire. Another aspect of our brain's hardwiring for survival is a rapid memorization of the traumatic event and everything surrounding it. The idea is that if we can memorize every single detail surrounding a traumatic event, then when any one of those same things happen again, we can flag it for danger and be on high alert. Unfortunately, this system isn't the best at discerning which aspects of the traumatic event are actually dangerous and which were just background. For example, if I'm assaulted by a man in a red hat, my brain might now flag men in red hats as danger. So every time I see a man in a red hat, my heart rate goes up, my breathing gets faster, maybe I start to sweat, and I might not be registering why my body is acting as though I'm in danger when I know logically that there's nothing hazardous about red hats. But subconsciously, I'm going through the same physiological process as when the initial assault occurred or close to it. And this would be what we call a trigger, something that reminds us of a traumatic event and thereby causes our nervous system to react as though that traumatic event is happening now. And we'll take a little bit of a closer look at triggers a little bit later. Something I want to clarify is the difference between implicit and explicit memory. So explicit memory is linear, it's logical, verbal, and story-like. It's also the type of memories that you can consciously retrieve. So if I ask you how you got ready this morning, you'd likely be able to recount to me how you got out of bed, took a shower, made coffee, etc. Implicit memory, however, is emotionally and somatically based. It's nonverbal and subconsciously informs how we respond to various stimuli. It's often described as a felt sense or knowing. So after I was in a car accident last winter, I couldn't tell you what happened. I remember the smoky smell of the airbags being deployed, the feeling of having my breath taken away, and the sound of rain on the windshield. This event was stored in my implicit memory. And this is because for many of us, when trauma happens, we dissociate. This is especially true in the case of childhood trauma. Our systems know what's happening is too much. So we put our consciousness somewhere else as a way of protecting ourselves just a little bit. It doesn't remotely make us immune to our traumatic experiences, but it does cause those memories to be stored in our implicit memory as opposed to our explicit memory. And this is why for some of us who have experienced traumatic events, it can be hard to recall exactly what happened. We might not be able to tell the whole story from start to finish, but we know how it felt. And I've spoken to our survival mechanism that memorizes every little bit of the traumatic event so we can protect ourselves in the future. But a lot of the time that memory is implicit and it's subconscious. So how does this all relate to sex? Any type of trauma can affect our experience of sex. And I'll give you some reasons why. Earlier, when we talked about what happens in our brains and bodies when we experience a trauma or trigger, the experience of becoming aroused is very similar. Our heart rate speeds up, our breathing gets faster. The parts of our brain that are emotional and impulsive become activated, and the logical, decision-making parts of our brain get quieter. This alone can be triggering, as the physical experience of becoming aroused shares so many qualities with the physical experience of a trauma. And one way many of us cope with trauma is to try and control our environments and experiences. We subconsciously think that if we can control things, we'll be safe. But if you can't let go of control, it's pretty hard to let go into a sexual experience. For some, we might try to reenact traumatic relationships so that we can have closure to something that for us was unfinished. And there are many, many other possible effects of trauma on our sexual experience. These include, but are not limited to, low desire, difficulty orgasming, sexual pain or vaginismus, erectile dysfunction, which is interestingly very common with car accidents, a wounded sense of self-worth, which is especially common for male survivors of sexual trauma. Just a side note to that is that the number one reason men don't report sexual assault from other men is a fear of being labeled as gay. Other potential effects include compulsive masturbation or porn use, rigid expectations of ourselves and our partners regarding sex, needing to use substances in order to feel comfortable with sexual activity, and difficulties with arousal, which can include a lack of lubrication or challenges connecting to a feeling of arousal. Additionally, many folks experience dissociation or flashbacks within their sexual experiences, and this is one way that sex can actually be re-traumatizing. Another revolves around the experience of violation. When our trauma involves another person violating our boundaries, whether we were able to say no in the moment or not, we often lose some sense of power in setting and maintaining our own boundaries. So many of us become much less likely to say no in the future. And when we allow sex to happen that we're not actually comfortable with, we can be re-traumatized in that way as well. And this is one of the reasons I make it explicitly clear in my private practice and even in this workshop that any activity, homework, or exercise that I suggest, my clients have every right to say no to. And when one of my clients with trauma turns down an exercise that I suggest, I highlight and applaud that for them. It's possible that simply saying no to me might have just been just as helpful for their healing as going through the exercise. So before we move from sort of the psychoeducation of how trauma works and how it affects the sex, I want to pause for questions. I just want to hear from anybody if you have any questions so far before we move on. I think you could raise your hand or write in the chat if you have questions. I'm going to figure out how to check that. Looks like not so much. Awesome. Great. So what do we do about it? There are 3 stages to addressing and working with trauma that's affecting your experience of sex. The first is to regulate your nervous system and work towards feeling safe and embodied at the same time. The second is to process traumatic memories. And the third is to reconnect with your sexual self and integrate your healing back into your sex life. I'd like to note that this process of healing does not have to exist independently from having a sex life. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can absolutely continue with your sex life as you move through the trauma healing process. So phase 1 is regulation and safety. As I spoke about earlier, when we experience a trauma, our sympathetic nervous system becomes highly activated. And because our brains are now on high alert for the next danger, we often spend more time triggered and in a sympathetic nervous system state. As I mentioned before, this causes our heart rate to speed up, our breathing to become fast and shallow, and it diverts blood from our organs to our muscles. In brief stints, our bodies can handle this. But remaining in a near constant sympathetic nervous system state can cause digestive issues and disrupted sleep, each of which with their own cascading effects. Interestingly enough, the pelvic floor is also highly sensitive to the sympathetic nervous system and will often tighten and clench. This can disrupt blood flow to the genitals, contributing to erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, pelvic pain, and vaginismus. It's hard to relax when your body is scared. So we want to start to turn on our parasympathetic nervous system. This is characterized by slow, deep breathing, a slow heart rate, and blood in the organs to aid with digestion and repair. Of these physiological responses, one is in your control, and that's breath. Our breathing is the only system in our body that is both automatic and voluntary. You don't have to think about it and control it, but you can. By slowing down your breathing and taking full deep breaths into your belly, you can actually send signals back to your brain that say, we're safe here. No dangers to avoid. We're okay. So while this is simple and widely suggested by mental health professionals, it's for good reason. And I'd like to invite you to try it with me right now. 3 deep breaths. Inhaling all the way into the belly. And exhaling. 2 more. Big deep breath in. And out. Last one. Big breath in. and out. Great. Pay attention to how you feel right now. Is it any different? I notice for myself, I can feel my skin and the surface of my body more than I could 2 minutes ago. So depending on where your nervous system is at, you might try to incorporate deep breathing at regular intervals throughout your day. Or you can use it as a first response when you first start to notice yourself becoming triggered. Another technique I'd like to offer you is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this is especially useful when you notice you're triggered. It also works really well for a lot of folks with anxiety. Or if your nervous system is in a chronic sympathetic state, that fight, flight, or freeze, you can start to incorporate it into your regular routine. And the idea is that when we're triggered, our nervous system is responding to a threat because some aspect of what's happening right now shares something with a trauma we've experienced. So even though we're actually safe, our nervous system disagrees. So the point of this exercise is to tell your nervous system what's actually happening around you. And it goes like this. Either out loud if I'm by myself, or in my head if I'm around other people, I name 5 things I can see, 4 things I can feel with my body, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, and 1 thing I can taste. So if I were to do it right now, I could say that I can see the sunny day outside. I can see that my walls are white. I can see my dark floors. I can see the plants on my desk, and I can see my phone on my desk. I can feel the chair that I'm sitting on, the blazer that I'm wearing, my elbows on the desk, and the breeze coming in from the window. I can hear cars going by. I can hear wind rustling through the plants outside, and I can hear the sound of my own voice. I can smell the fresh air and the smell of my office. And I can taste the water that I was just drinking. And so I would like to invite for you to try it with me right now. Wherever you are, just name 5 things you can see. Four things you can feel with your body. 3 things you can hear. 2 things you can smell. And 1 thing you can taste. Awesome. And I want to reiterate, or I want to specify that if you don't remember the order, if you do 5 things you can taste, that would be impressive, and 4 things you can hear and 3 things you can see, that's okay. The order is such that it goes from easiest to hardest. It's easy to name things you can see. Feeling is next because embodiment is so crucial. But if you do it in any order, you do 3 things you can see and 5 things you can feel, awesome. So I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 people how that was for you, or if you have any questions in what we've covered so far. And again, I think you can raise your hand or come on the mic or go into the chat. Open the chat. I'll give you guys a minute. Okay, great. So we've gone over a couple tools that you can use to help regulate your nervous system and guide it back towards a more parasympathetic state. If you're looking for additional strategies for that, you might also try meditation, a yoga practice, nature walks in areas that feel safe to you. That's really important. Soothing music, warm baths, really anything that feels soothing to you, but not numbing. Another component of this stage is building safety. What safety looks like to me is going to be different from what safety looks like to you. But there are some key components to sexual safety. One is actually safer sex practices. It's going to be hard to relax and feel safe if you're worried about a pregnancy or an STI. Another is to start paying closer attention to your own needs and responding to them. For example, many folks who have experienced trauma have dissociated to the point that they don't notice if they are hungry or have to use the bathroom until the need is dire. It can be helpful to begin to pay close attention to your needs and attend to them as soon as you're able. And this communicates to your body that you're listening and taking care of it. So for some, that might mean, checking in every half an hour and being like, am I hungry right now? Does my body have any needs? Do I have anything I can attend to? And maybe that means there's a timer on your phone. It's going to look differently for different people. Another huge way that we create safety for ourselves is by setting and maintaining boundaries. Boundaries are a massive topic, and I could spend a whole hour on them, but I'll share a couple key aspects. One is that everybody's boundaries are different, which means your unique boundaries are totally valid, and the people in your life won't have much of an idea what they are unless you communicate them. For some, boundary is a dirty word. We don't want to tell the people we love what to do or be too difficult to be in connection with. But communicating our boundaries actually helps the people who love us to love us better. In general, I believe that we as humans want to contribute to making each other's lives more wonderful. And letting the people who love us know our boundaries gives them the opportunity to do just that. Additionally, boundaries are not intended to tell other people what to do. They actually let others know how far we're willing to go. For example, let's say I was dating somebody who came from a super loud family. Yelling and shouting were simply how they communicated with each other, and no one minded. Me, coming from a quiet, polite family where the only time anyone yelled, it was my dad, and it meant we were in danger. I'm not okay with yelling. The first time we get into a fight, it's not going to go very well. They'll yell, I'll be scared, they won't understand, nothing gets resolved. So at a time when we're not fighting, I might let them know that yelling while things are heated is a boundary for me. I'm not okay with it. And if it continues past a period of time that we mutually agree is reasonable, I'm either going to have to create more space in the relationship or leave. This isn't an ultimatum. It's a communication of how far I'm willing to go. A key aspect of setting good boundaries is something I call not moving the goalposts. The metaphor is this. When we set a boundary, we're putting up 2 goalposts for our loved one to aim at. If they shoot and miss, and as the ball is flying through the air, we move those goalposts so that they still score, our boundaries don't count for much. And you owe it to yourself to maintain the boundaries you set. Any questions on boundaries? Great. So boundaries segue perfectly into our next component of building safety, which is consent. If you're someone navigating difficulties in your sexuality after a trauma, incorporating what might seem like excessive consent can be really helpful. Consent questions can sound like, would you like to? Would you like me to? Would you enjoy it if I? They don't all have to be, can I? And one exercise you could try if you have sexual intimacy with a partner is a sensual experience in which nothing happens without verbal consent. So kissing stays at kissing until both people agree to change what you're doing. And this isn't going to be the right step for everyone. For some, taking a break from sex altogether is going to be an important step for creating safety. And this is where paying attention to your body, to your needs, is going to be absolutely crucial as you move through this process. A final suggestion that I have for building safety is engaging in non-sexual intimacy. So this could be eye contact, hand holding, cuddling, simply sitting side by side and touching, massages, etc. This leads us to embodiment, which lives in the first stage of our healing process, but I believe is a subject all to itself. To be embodied is to be present in your body with the wide range of physical sensations and emotions as they occur, as opposed to being in your thoughts or externally focused. To quote Diana Sadat, good sex can be about what we do. Great sex is about presence. Everyone's relationship with their body and being present inside of it is going to be different. I have clients for whom their body is a scary, unsafe place, and we do short, timed intervals of embodiment with a very clear endpoint. And for others, there is more of a distracted forgetfulness, and embodiment is a practice. It's important to be in our bodies so that we're able to know what feels good for us and what's not okay. And for us to be able to fully choose. In our bodies is also where we feel sensual and sexual pleasure. If we can't exist inside our bodies, we're not going to be able to feel those things. So I'd like to do an exercise with you right now to support embodiment. It's called a body scan. And what will happen is I'll have you get comfortable, and then I'll direct your attention through each part of your body one by one. And so if you'd like to participate in this, I'll ask you to get comfy where you are, either sitting or lying down. If you've been joining this conference for a long time, sometimes I really like just lying on the floor or a yoga mat. Now that you're there, if it feels safe for you to do so, you can close your eyes. Otherwise, you can softly focus your eyes on a single point. Begin by bringing a general awareness of posture, with your back in an upright position and your spine, neck, and head in alignment if you're sitting. If you're lying down, extend the top of your head and the bottoms of your feet gently in opposite directions. For a few minutes, just to become aware of your breathing. Notice the rate, depth, location, sounds, pressure, temperature, and other characteristics of your breathing. You're not manipulating your breath or trying to breathe deeper or differently. Your goal is just to pay attention. Also, there are no correct sensations to notice as you pay attention to the breath or to other parts of the body for that matter. Whatever arises in your attention is worthy of paying attention to. You're just going to keep following the breath with your mind's eye for a few moments. As you're ready, move your attention down the left side of your body, all the way down to the toes of your left foot. This area, the individual toes, the spaces between the toes, and the points of contact between your toes and your sock, shoe, or the floor, will be your new focus of attention. Try to notice as many individual sensations as you can. For example, do you notice sensations of contact, tingling, moisture, itching, or warmth, or coolness? You may detect that there are no prominent sensations when you focus on an area, and that is fine too. And you can notice what it feels like to not notice sensations. The specific sensations are not important. Bring attention to the toes as they are. If you find that no sensations are present in this region, then just experience what's there. Experience the big toe as it is, and the little toe, and perhaps the toes in between. After noticing the toes and other regions of the left foot, move your attention up to the ankle. Then to the lower leg, the knee, and the upper areas of the left leg, paying attention to the various sensations in every region. Remember that your goal is simply to observe, not to create any different sensations. Often, many of us may lose focus and notice other sounds or thoughts, possibly even thinking to ourselves, this is boring, or is this working? That's okay. Next, focus on the right foot and leg. The chest, the back, the arms, the neck, and the head. When you're ready, move your attention to the right hip and the left hip, and the entire area of your pelvis, following these instructions. Notice any sensations in your pelvis and lower abdomen, your buttocks, and your genitals, including sensations of contact with your chair, yoga mat, or floor. If you do notice sensations, are they pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? There may also be thoughts that come up. And as best you can, simply allow even judgmental or critical thoughts to be there without reacting to them or judging yourself for having them. Bring the same gentle acceptance to thought sensations as you are bringing to any physical sensations. Having now paid attention to all the individual regions of the body, you can spend a few moments expanding your field of awareness to include your entire body, from the top of your head to the bottoms of your feet. Try to pay careful attention to the many individual sensations that arise and pass away within this larger field of awareness, wherever they may be located in the body. You can allow your attention to move fluidly from sensation to sensation, wherever they arise in the body, momentarily focusing on one as it rises and fades. And spend a minute or two observing in this way. As your practice comes to a close, deliberately form an intention to introduce movements into your fingers and toes. And before you move them, watch closely how that intention to move gets translated into the movement of those body parts. Pause for a moment. Next, make an intention to open your eyes. And then slowly allow that command to reach your eye muscles to open them. Pause. And you can make any other movement you would like. Thank yourself for taking this time to bring a non-judgmental awareness to your body. And remember that this state of awareness is accessible to you by simply attending to sensations at any time of the day. So as we're coming back, maybe some of you are coming up off the floor. If you have any thoughts or things you'd like to share about how that was for you, I would love to hear it.
Awesome. Hi, Alicia. I'm just going to jump in there because we've got a question in the Q&A.
Okay, great.
So we've got a question that's, what would a boundary look like in relation to sex?
What would a boundary look like in relation to sex?
Yeah, so I'm guessing that they're sort of saying, you know, how do you set boundaries maybe if you're already having sex? Like, you know, I'm just guesstimating here because, you know, it's quite an open question, but
yeah.
Is there any way that you could think that you could help someone to guide them if they've, you know, if people have already made the wrong or you know, pushed themselves a little bit further than they wanted to go originally? Maybe is there a way that we can give them a tool to help like realign and make themselves feel a bit more confident in themselves to then halt that process going any further?
Yeah. So something I love to suggest around setting boundaries with partners, and especially sexual partners, is to talk about them when it's not in the moment. So the example I used of my partner yelling at me, not that this was a real example, but it's a hypothetical example. I wouldn't then say in the moment that they're yelling at me, yelling is a boundary. I'm going to let that fight play out at a calm time. I'm going to come to them and I'm going to say, hey, yelling doesn't actually work for me. In terms of sex, I'm not sure what type of boundary this person is particularly trying to set, but it could be like, I want you to verbally ask me before we engage in sex, because maybe when sexy things start happening, I have a hard time saying no if I'm not comfortable. So at a time when sexy things aren't happening, at a calm time, I'm going to come to them and I'm going to say, like, hey, I think a boundary for me is actually to get verbal consent before we have sex or get sexy together. Would that work for you? You know?
I think I totally get that, because it's sometimes people get caught up and swept away with what they're doing in the moment. And I think there's a lot to be said. And within the adult industry, before you do sort of performances, you sit down, you have a chat about what you are prepared to do and what you want to do and how you want it to play out. And there's a lot of that could actually be quite well reflected into everyday relationships. You know, before you actually even enter into any sexual relations with someone, if you have any set items that you don't like to do or you don't want to perform, then it's a case of, well, let's have that discussion beforehand, before we get too intimate, before things go too far. And hopefully, you know, people will respond well to that. But it's all about communication is key, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And taking that time to communicate at a calm time and being really clear and explicit. This is my boundary. This is how you can meet it. This is the sort of window of learning process that I'm willing to tolerate and work with you around. And this is my limit of how far I'm actually willing to go if this boundary continually gets crossed.
No, that's brilliant. Has anyone else got any other queries or questions that I'd like to put towards Alicia? She's ever so good with details, and she's worked on previous stuff with us before, and obviously it's quite a tough topic, so some people don't want to open up about their traumas and what's going on. But obviously, Alicia, if you'd like to let everybody know what your sort of go-to handle is, so if they wanted to get hold of you separately, they can also come via obviously Pineapple Support. But if you wanted to contact you directly, do you mind providing a contact detail or your website?
Yeah, totally. So my website is sidebyside.counseling.ca. That's probably the easiest one to remember. You can also shoot me an email at alicia@sidebysidecounseling.ca. My Instagram is sidebyside.counseling.
And we've just had another little comment just from another
Sure.
viewer that's just said that awesome info. Thanks for all of this. Is there
Awesome.
any other items that? Sorry, because I jumped in to sort of say about the question. I didn't know whether I've cut you off midstream or
No,
anything.
it's okay. I have some more stuff to present. We have another 8 minutes, yeah?
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to switch off and then leave you to it back again. Okay.
Cool. And if there is another question or two at the end, I've got space for that.
Excellent.
Awesome. So we've gone through phase one of safety and regulation and building embodiment. This is sort of the biggest phase because you're not going to be able to process your triggers and your trauma without a solid foundation of safety, which is our phase two. And it's often the most difficult and requires the most support. And for this phase, I highly recommend working with a licensed therapist who specializes in trauma. If finding the right therapist or paying for therapy is daunting for you, I'd suggest reaching out to a therapist or organization in your area. I'm always happy to help folks find a therapist who will work well with them, and giving appropriate referrals is a big part of my job. But that being said, the majority of my network is here in BC. So if that's not where you're looking for a therapist, I'd suggest reaching out to someone more local to you. All that being said, there are absolutely steps you can take on your own. And one of the first things you can do is begin to identify your triggers. When it comes to sex, these might be smells, sights, types of touch, arousal itself, pleasure, types of sex, temperature, etc. And once you have some idea of triggers that you have, sharing them with your partner or partners can be really helpful so that you can be on the same team and share a degree of understanding. And next is to make a trigger plan. So what are you going to do when you get triggered? You want to make this plan well before becoming triggered so you have it in your back pocket when a trigger arises. And there are 3 steps to a good trigger plan. Stop. So stop what you're doing. Breathe. This is your moment for regulating your nervous system. Take a few deep belly breaths. Maybe practice your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, or whatever works for you to regulate. And then choose. So make a choice of what you'll do next. And the key here is to turn towards your partner as opposed to turning away. But you'll likely be changing activities, but do so at the same level of closeness as what you were doing before the trigger happened. So if we're snuggling, maybe I'd like to switch to holding hands and making eye contact instead. And this is where the growth happens. When we're triggered, we generally want to run away and hide. But if we do that every time, we're only going to feel safe when we're hidden away. But by changing what's happening while still staying in connection, we're honoring our body's no and allowing for growth and healing to occur. And I'd like to reiterate that I don't think healing trauma is a solo journey, and the help of and support of a great therapist is invaluable. Phase 3, this is the exciting part, is reconnecting with your sexual self and integrating your healing back into your sex life. You'll know that you've reached this phase when you're not getting triggered as often. You're able to be more present in your body. You're not dissociating as often. And when you do, you're able to come back to your body more quickly. You're able to confidently communicate your boundaries and needs. And there's a sense of play when it comes to your sexuality. And this sense of play is what phase 3 is all about. Here you might explore different fantasies or types of erotica. You'll start to explore your turn-ons and desires. Phase 3 is about following your curiosity and pleasure, which also extends to your cup of coffee in the morning, a walk you took, snuggling your dog, or just about anything else you can find pleasure in. This might be the time you try a new sex toy or complete a yes, no, maybe list with your partner, or maybe get a little more creative together. Pleasure in itself is healing. So we are coming towards the end of our time for today, and I'd like to still leave a minute or two for questions. But before I do, I want to add that for many of my clients in phase 1, I suggest paying attention to anything you can find pleasure in, and simply to notice that. Our brains are hardwired for survival, which means we automatically pay attention to anything that threatens us. But turning our attention to what we enjoy takes conscious effort. Effort that I would suggest is entirely worth it. So I'd like to thank you all so much for joining me for this hour. This has been so rich and fun for me. And I do have 3 whole minutes for questions if there are any more questions.
I'm going to be really cheeky and pop in and say, I've got a question.
Yeah, great.
So I've previously struggled with setting myself boundaries, and I've found that, you know, sort of a lot of the things that you've sort of brought up today have helped me previously, but I also am very lax at maintaining my direction with it. So are there any, someone's actually just put a question which is very similar about any resources or podcasts about this topic, because I find as well that it's furthered learning and watching more and being more aligned with that does help me more to focus on maintaining that and maintaining those boundaries. So like I say, thank you to the Q&A, because you've put that in a bit more concise way than I have. But could you recommend any resources or any podcasts that you would?
Yeah, I personally have struggled to find podcasts that I love about therapy or boundaries. But a lot of this comes from ASECT, so the American Sex Therapy Institute. I'm saying their name wrong, but if you search ASECT, they have a ton of resources on their website. I'm actually going to just pull it up right now so I can get it correct for you. So the American Association, oh my goodness, of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. There's a lot to remember, but they have a ton of stuff on their website in terms of articles and trainings. A lot of the stuff around the triphasic model for healing trauma that's affecting sex comes from there. In terms of boundaries, I really like Nidra Tawwab's book. And you can find her on Instagram. She posts all sorts of great things, NedraTawwab. She has a ton of work on boundaries. Boundaries are her bread and butter. And to specifically answer your more personal question around maintaining boundaries, I think that for a lot of us who have had a survival mechanism of making other people in our life happy, or making sure when we're little that the adults in our life were calm and happy and that was our job, it can be hard to prioritize our own needs. And if we want to be in balanced adult relationships, our needs have to matter just as much as the people we're in relationship with. And one of the ways that we can show ourselves that our needs are important is by prioritizing our boundaries. And it's a practice. I've absolutely been in relationships where I set a boundary and then they didn't hit it. And I was like, okay, well, let's just adjust my boundary so that maybe you could,
let's roll with it.
maybe you could try again. Maybe I said 2 months for you to get things together, but maybe 2 more months and then we'll check back in. But in that relationship, I wasn't prioritizing myself. I wasn't saying, hey, I'm actually so valuable that I deserve to have my boundaries met.
No, that's exactly true. I've actually got some other questions coming in now. So it's ASECT. Is that how you spell it? ASECT.
AASECT.
AASECT. There we go. Thank you as much. And obviously, we all try and set boundaries for ourselves, and we try and push forward to make sure that we are maintaining that. But obviously, as well, it's nice to know that other people are keeping an eye out for us as well. And so with people like yourself and resources like with Pineapple Support and what we're able to put forward, we do hope that we can help others out there who haven't managed, like myself, to be able to master it completely themselves.
Yeah.
If you had a chance to sort of say to everybody, if they had to just do one thing and that you think would help them in the first stage, would that be to like reach out and, like you say, speak to a good therapist to start with, rather than trying to self-diagnose and self-change them if they're not able to do it so far? I'm not explaining myself very well.
No, I hear what you're saying. You're asking if there was one thing that everybody could do, would it be to reach out to a therapist?
Yeah.
I would say in an ideal world, yes. And I also acknowledge that for many, there are boundaries to reaching out to a therapist. I know that when clients reach out to me, they've already done some work to be able to take that step. And I've had clients who book a consultation call and then can't take the call because it's too overwhelming, it's too scary. And so I would say that if I were to say that everybody did one thing to work on this, it would be to practice embodiment. So to feel your feet on the floor, to notice the sip of coffee in the morning, to pay attention to the feeling of the shower raining down on your head, and to integrate a feeling of safety in your body until the point where you can get support. I think that for the majority of us, our traumas are created in connection with somebody else. And the way to work through them is in connection with somebody else. And of course, you can talk to your friends and your partner and your family, and they might be really loving and well-intentioned and supporting you on your journey, but they also aren't going to have the same level of education, experience, and knowledge as a therapist or mental health professional.
I am a massive advocate of being grounded, though. Like, I do quite often take my shoes and socks off and get outside to get myself recenter. But no, thank you so much for your time. As always, you're so literate and you come across so well, and it's calming to listen to. And the topics you cover are so intense. But you present them so well. I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly.